58,000 people were already inside, screaming, stomping, waving glow sticks in the dark like Los Angeles itself had caught fire. And outside, at the VIP entrance, under a single yellow light, stood a man nobody noticed. Thin, quiet, holding a faded plastic grocery bag with both hands like it carried something more valuable than anything inside that stadium. His name was Aldous Croft, and he was wearing torn khaki trousers, a gray cotton shirt with a frayed collar, and sandals that had seen too many rainy seasons. Security saw him first. "Sir, this entrance is restricted." Aldous looked up slowly. No anger, no panic, just a tired patience that lived behind his eyes like it had been there for years. "I'm here for Ren," he said quietly. "She's my wife." The guard looked him up and down the way people look at something they've already decided to dismiss. Move along. Her name was Ren Calloway. And if you lived anywhere between Houston and Beverly Hills in the last 4 years, you knew that name. 29 years old, 5 Grammy nominations. The kind of voice that made grown men cry in their cars on a freeway and then pretend they had allergies. Tonight was her sold-out Elevation Tour finale at SoFi Stadium, the crown jewel of her career, the biggest night of her life. Cameras from 3 streaming networks were rolling. Celebrity guests were lined up in the VIP boxes. Her face was on billboards from Inglewood to Santa Monica. Everything she ever wanted, right here, right now. Backstage, Ren stood in front of a full-length mirror in a custom silver gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her stylist, a sharp-tongued woman named Isolde, was adjusting her earrings. Her manager, Prescott Vane, tall, groomed, always smelling like expensive cologne and bad decisions, was scrolling through his phone while talking at the same time. "Streaming numbers are already up 40%, Prescott said. "By midnight, this is going to be the most watched live concert on the platform. You're about to become untouchable, Ren." She smiled at the mirror, not at Prescott, at herself. There's a special kind of smile that people wear when they've decided the past no longer applies to them. Like a snake after it sheds its skin. Smooth, new, unbothered. That was Ren's smile tonight. And standing near the curtain, half in shadow, half in the backstage glow, was a man named Dorian Fisk. Dorian was Ren's investor, her so-called business partner. 43 years old, silver-templed, handsome in a way that made your gut uneasy if you looked too long. He wore a charcoal blazer and held a champagne flute with the casual authority of a man who believed the world was his personal waiting room. He leaned toward Ren and whispered, "After tonight, we make the announcement." She glanced at him in the mirror. The engagement? The engagement. The new label deal. All of it. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Clean break, Ren. No more baggage." That's what Aldous Croft had become to her. Baggage. Back at the VIP gate, 2 more security guards had now joined the first. Aldous hadn't moved. He wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't raising his voice. He was simply standing there, patient as a man who had learned long ago that making noise rarely opened the right doors. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance," the lead guard, a wide-shouldered man named Briggs, said with finality. "Can you just tell her I'm here?" Aldous asked. "Tell her Aldous is outside." Briggs radioed backstage. A production assistant named Gemma received a message. She frowned, walked to Prescott, and whispered in his ear. Prescott's face tightened. He walked to Ren slowly. "There's a man outside. Says his name is Aldous. Says he's your—" "I know who he is." Her voice was flat, cold as a Los Angeles January. She didn't move for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, not toward softness, toward decision. She walked toward the backstage window that faced the outer entrance and looked down through the glass. There he was, her husband of 6 years, standing in the rain with a plastic bag, and she felt nothing warm. That should tell you everything. 6 years ago, Ren Calloway was not Ren Calloway. She was Ren Pruitt, a 23-year-old woman singing covers at a small bar called Coppa's in East Austin, Texas, making $80 a night, taking the bus home, eating instant noodles in a studio apartment that smelled like paint and old carpet. And Aldous Croft was a man who sat in the 3rd row every single Friday night. Not because he was rich, not because he was connected, but because he believed in her voice the way some people believe in prayer. Completely, without proof, without condition. He was a construction worker back then. 5 days a week, hauling materials on job sites in the Austin summer heat. On weekends, he drove for a rideshare app from 7 in the evening until 2 in the morning. He wasn't poor by choice. He was poor by circumstance. But he was the kind of man who treated circumstance the way a river treats a rock. Quietly, persistently, patient enough to change the shape of things. They fell in love the way real people do, slowly and then all at once, not in a dramatic way. In a grocery store, an argument about which brand of rice was better. In a parking lot, him fixing her flat tire in the rain while she held the flashlight and made him laugh with bad jokes. In a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m. when her mother had a health scare and he drove 4 hours without being asked. They married on a Tuesday in Travis County. No venue, no dress, a courthouse and 2 witnesses. His co-worker Bramble and her old college friend Odette. Small, quiet, honest. A year later, Ren's demo recordings were going nowhere. She had talent, but no money, no connections, no path forward. And that's when Aldous did something nobody knew. He called his mother and asked about his father's land. His late father, Ezra Croft, had left him a small plot of land outside Bastrop, Texas. Nothing glamorous. 12 acres of dry grass and cedar trees. But it was worth something. Aldous had kept it as the one piece of his father he still had. He sold it. Every dollar went into Ren's first professional recording session. He hired a producer named Gideon Marsh in Dallas. Paid for studio time, mixing, mastering, and a small press run. He drove her to every meeting, every session, every pitch, every rejection. And there were many rejections. But Aldous never made her feel the weight of them. He'd come home with construction dust in his hair and say, "What do you need next?" Like failure was just weather, uncomfortable but temporary. 2 years later, Ren Calloway got her first label offer, and then another, and then a streaming deal, and then a tour. Fame doesn't destroy people all at once. It works slowly, like water behind a dam, no drama, no announcement, just pressure, building quietly until one day, the whole wall gives. The first sign was small. Ren stopped mentioning Aldous in interviews, not publicly denying him, just not mentioning him. "I'm focused on the music right now," she'd say when journalists asked about her personal life, which sounded humble, which sounded professional, which was technically not a lie. But Aldous noticed. Then came the celebrity circle. Prescott introduced her to people whose entire identity was their status. People who measure human worth in follower counts and zip codes. They laughed loudly, dressed expensively, and had a particular talent for making ordinary people feel invisible. They met Aldous once at a small dinner. One of them, a music blogger named Theron who had built a career on cruelty dressed as opinion, looked at Aldous' worn jacket and said, loud enough for the table to hear, "Wait, is this the husband? Ren, you kept us quiet." Everyone laughed. Aldous smiled politely and said nothing, but Ren saw the look on their faces, and something in her started to agree with it. Her mother, Celestine, a woman who had always resented her own poverty more than she had ever worked to escape it, began calling more often. "Baby, I'm proud of you," Celestine would say, "but you need to think about your image. You're an entertainer now. These people don't see a woman, they see a brand. And that man," she always paused there, deliberately, "he doesn't fit the brand anymore." Then Dorian Fisk entered the picture. He came through a management referral, said he was interested in investing in Ren's next album and tour. He wore the kind of watch that made people assume you were competent, and he had a way of making every room feel like it existed for his convenience. Ren was flattered by his attention, not because she was naive, she wasn't, but because Dorian offered something Aldous couldn't in that season of her life. He offered validation from the world she now lived in. Aldous offered love from the world she was running from, and she had started to confuse the two. 3 months before the Elevation tour, Ren came home to their house in Bel Air. Yes, Bel Air, the address Aldous had quietly purchased 2 years earlier as a surprise, and told him she needed space. Space, Aldous had repeated, "I need to focus on the tour, on the next chapter." She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the floor. "Ren." His voice was very quiet. "Look at me." She did. Briefly. "Is there someone else?" The pause was half a second too long. "I need to focus on my career," she said again. He didn't press. That was Aldous. He never pushed through a door that wasn't open for him. He moved his things to a smaller room in the house. Then, 2 weeks later, moved out entirely to a modest apartment in Inglewood, the kind of neighborhood that used to be their world and was now invisible to her. He never told anyone, not Bramwell, not even his mother. He just went quiet, and Ren let him. Back at SoFi, the concert was 40 minutes in. Ren was performing Higher Ground, ironically, a song about loyalty, when she got the notification on her earpiece from Prescott backstage. He's still outside the gate. Security says he won't leave. She missed half a lyric. The band covered it. The crowd didn't notice. But Dorian noticed. He was watching from the side stage, and his jaw tightened. He had worked very deliberately to keep Aldous far from this world, to widen the distance between Ren and her past until it became uncrossable. He had reasons for that, reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with business. But we'll get to that. Ren made a decision in that moment, a decision that would take everything she had built and crack it right down the middle. She reached the end of the song. The crowd erupted, and instead of moving into the next track, she held the microphone for a long moment and smiled. "You know what?" she said, her voice warm with performance. "Tonight is about authenticity, about being real with the people who support you." The crowd cheered. "So I'm going to do something different." She turned toward the wings. "Security, can you bring someone in from outside? There's a man at the VIP gate. Bring him up here." The crowd buzzed with curiosity. Backstage, the production team exchanged confused looks. Prescott started walking fast toward the stage. Briggs, the gate guard, heard the instruction through his earpiece and blinked twice at Aldous. "Come with me, sir." Aldous looked uncertain for the first time all night. "What's happening?" "Ms. Calloway wants you on stage." And here, right here, is where the night split into before and after. When Aldous walked out under those lights, the entire stadium shifted. 58,000 people saw him. The torn shirt, now soaked through from the rain. The worn sandals leaving small wet prints on the polished stage floor. The plastic bag still in his hand, because nobody had thought to take it from him. He stood in the center of that stage like a man who had walked into the wrong building and was too dignified to run. And the crowd laughed. Not cruelly at first, just that confused, uncomfortable laughter that happens when something doesn't make sense. But then the phone cameras came up. The live streamers started commentating, and the energy curdled. Ren walked toward him, microphone in hand, smile intact. She stopped a few feet away. "Who is this man?" she asked the crowd. More laughter. Dorian, watching from the wings, felt something shift in his chest. Not regret, something closer to calculation. He stepped back deeper into the shadows. From behind the monitor board, an older man watched with a very different expression. His name was Gideon Marsh, the producer, the one who had been there from the beginning, who had taken that first recording session money from Aldous Croft's hands 6 years ago and turned it into something real. He had stayed in Ren's circle not because of the money she eventually brought, but because he genuinely believed in what they had built together. He had tried to warn Ren about Dorian twice. Both times she had smiled past him. Now Gideon watched Aldous standing under those lights. Patient, dignified, heartbreaking, and felt something cold settle into his stomach. Back on stage, Ren was still performing the moment. "Ladies," she said, her voice carrying over every speaker in that stadium. "Can I tell you something real tonight?" The crowd roared. "Never, and I mean never." She let the pause breathe. "Settle for a man who cannot elevate your life." 58,000 people erupted. Phones were recording. The streaming numbers spiked. Aldous stood still. He didn't flinch, didn't respond, didn't look away. There was something so still in him, in that moment, that Gideon had to look down at his console to steady himself. Then Ren walked forward and grabbed the plastic bag from Aldous's hand. He let her take it. She held up for the crowd that faded, unremarkable plastic grocery bag and turned it upside down. Things spilled across the stage floor. Old envelopes, a small CD case, photographs, papers. The crowd laughed at the mess. "Get him out of my concert," Wren said. 2 security guards moved in from each side, and Aldous Croft was walked, not dragged, because he went calmly through the crowd and out of the building. He never looked back at her. Not once. Gideon was down from the monitor booth before the doors even closed behind Aldous. He pushed past a lighting technician, past 2 assistants on headsets, and crouched down on the stage floor where the contents of the bag had scattered. He picked up the first photograph. 2 young people sitting on the hood of a beaten-up truck outside a recording studio in Dallas. The man was smiling wide. The woman was laughing so hard her eyes were closed. Aldous and Wren. 6 years ago. He picked up one of the old envelopes. Inside was a letter, handwritten on lined notebook paper. "Wren, I know tonight was hard. I know the label said no again. But I want you to know that your voice is the most honest thing I have ever heard in my life. I would sell every acre of this land 10 times over to make sure the world hears it. Don't stop. Hey." Gideon's hands were not entirely steady. He gathered the items carefully. The letters, the CD, the photographs, a stack of old receipts and papers, and placed them back in the bag. Then he found something else. A folded document at the bottom. Official letterhead. Medical. He unfolded it slowly. And then he went very, very still. On stage, Wren was back in her performance. The crowd had been redirected. The energy was high again. She was singing, and they were responding. And to the 58,000 people in that building, everything was fine. But Gideon Marsh stood backstage with a medical report in one hand and a love letter in the other. And he looked out at the stage, at the woman performing like nothing had happened. And he said to no one in particular, "She just destroyed the man who built all of this." He folded the document back carefully. "And she has no idea that tonight, maybe the last time he ever sees her." The rain outside was still falling. Aldous Croft was already gone. The concert was 40 minutes from its finale. Wren was mid-set, performing Unbroken, the song that put her on the cover of 3 magazines, and the crowd was responding the way sold-out crowds do when they believe a performer is invincible. But backstage, the invincibility had already started to fracture. It began with the catering staff. A woman named Dulcie, who had been running concert hospitality for 12 years, walked up to production coordinator with a tablet and a very tight expression. The payment for tonight's hospitality contract just bounced. The coordinator looked up. "What?" "The wire transfer. It didn't clear. Our account shows a pending reversal from the primary concert fund." The coordinator grabbed her headset and started making calls. 2 minutes later, it wasn't just catering. The technical crew lead, a stocky, no-nonsense man named Rourke, was on the phone with his equipment company and going pale in real time. "What do you mean the account is frozen? We're in the middle of a live concert." He listened. His jaw tightened. "Since when?" Then the VIP hospitality manager found Prescott near the sound booth and told him quietly that 3 celebrity guests in the premium boxes were asking why their service had stopped. The champagne had run dry. The private servers had been pulled without notice. Someone up the chain had suspended the VIP services contract mid-show. Prescott's polished exterior began to show its first signs of sweat. He pulled out his phone and started working through his contacts, the financial handlers, the venue coordinator, the banking team. One by one, the calls went unanswered or came back with the same vague answer. "There's been a whole place on the associate accounts. We're waiting on authorization from the primary account holder." Primary account holder. Prescott stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the backstage corridor, surrounded by crew members moving fast, cables running across the floor, monitors flickering, and said that phrase again in his head. Primary account holder. He knew that name. He had always known that name. He had just spent 2 years making sure Wren never thought about it. Dorian Fisk was no longer watching from the side stage. He was in the green room, the private one, the one with the good lighting and the leather couches, and he was on his phone with a low, rapid voice that was nothing like the smooth, unhurried tone he used around Wren. "How far has it gone?" he said. A pause. All of it. Another pause. And the venue contract? He sat down slowly on the couch. Here's what the audience needed to know about Dorian Fisk, and what Wren had never been told. 3 years earlier, Dorian had been brought in as a consultant for a mid-sized entertainment investment group. His job was to identify artists with strong revenue potential and build acquisition strategies around them, not partnerships. Acquisitions. The kind of deal where the artist thinks they have a business partner and the investor knows they have a future asset. He had identified Wren early, and he had done his homework, which meant he had found Aldous. Not the Aldous that Wren saw, the quiet husband in worn clothes. The other Aldous, the one that existed in corporate filings and investment portfolios and real estate holdings that didn't advertise themselves. Dorian had seen the full picture 6 months before he ever introduced himself to Wren. And instead of walking away, he had walked closer because Dorian understood something that Wren didn't. If he could separate Wren from Aldous, fully, legally, publicly, he could position himself to absorb the revenue stream that Aldous had quietly built around her career. The label percentages, the venue partnerships, the licensing deals, the infrastructure of an empire that had been constructed in the background by a man who wore torn khakis and never put his name on anything because he didn't need the credit. He just needed his wife to succeed. That was the tragedy of it. Dorian had spent 2 years not just romancing Wren, but engineering her contempt for Aldous. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there, letting her celebrity friend see Aldous at his most ordinary, encouraging Celestine's poison, making sure every moment of contrast between Aldous's world and Wren's new one was maximized. And it worked. Until tonight. Because what Dorian had not planned for, what it seriously, catastrophically miscalculated, was that Aldous Croft already knew. He had known about Dorian for 14 months, and he had spent those 14 months very, very quietly making moves. The concert was entering its final segment. The lights dropped to deep blue. The crowd hushed into that particular reverence that only happens when an artist is about to perform their signature song. Wren walked to the center mic, and the opening chords of Carried Me, the song that had won her first Grammy nomination, the song about resilience, the song she had written in the apartment in East Austin while Aldous was working a double shift, began to play. She closed her eyes, and then the LED screens glitched. All 47 of them, the massive panels that wrapped the interior of SoFi Stadium from floor to ceiling, flickered simultaneously. A white noise burst. The crowd murmured in confusion. The band kept playing for 3 more seconds before they stopped too, because something was clearly wrong. The screens went black. Total darkness, except for the stage lights. Then text. White letters. Clean. Enormous. On every screen in the building simultaneously. Tonight's concert, Elevation Tour Finale, proudly presented by... A pause that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Long enough for 58,000 people to hold their breath. Then a logo appeared, Croft Meridian Holdings, and beneath it, a photograph, not a corporate headshot, not a pose image, a candid photograph of a man sitting at a construction site lunch table, eating a sandwich in the Texas heat, laughing at something off camera. Aldous Croft, the same face, the same eyes, the same quiet dignity that stood on the stage in torn clothes an hour ago. The stadium did not immediately react. There was a strange, suspended silence, like the moment between lightning and thunder when you aren't sure how close it is. Then the documents started appearing. One by one, the screens displayed them. First, a venue ownership certificate. SoFi Stadium Naming Rights Partnership. Croft Meridian Holdings. Dated 4 years prior. Second, a label distribution agreement. Wren Calloway's first record deal. The funding that launched it. Traced back through 2 holding companies to a single source. Croft Meridian. Third, a sponsorship ledger. Every major sponsor on the Elevation Tour. The beverage brand. The fashion partnership. The streaming platform exclusive. Each one with a line connecting it to the same investment group. Fourth, and this was the one that broke the silence wide open, a document titled Primary Career Investment Summary. Total financial contribution to artist career development. 2019 to 2025. The number at the bottom had 7 figures. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, in something rawer than that, in that collective human sound that happens when an audience realizes they've been watching something real, not a performance, not a stunt, something that was bleeding the entire time they were laughing. People were standing. People were talking to strangers next to them. Phones that had been recording Aldous' humiliation an hour ago were now recording the screens. Ren stood at the center microphone and did not move. The color had left her face completely. Dorian Fisk was already on his feet. He had watched the screens from a backstage monitor, and he was moving before the 4th document finished loading. Blazer on, phone in hand, eyes calculating the fastest route to the parking structure. He made it 15 feet before Gideon Marsh stepped into the corridor. Gideon was 61 years old, not particularly large, and was holding a plastic grocery bag in one hand. But he stepped directly into Dorian's path and did not move. "Where are you going?" Gideon said. "Out of my way, old man." "You knew." Gideon's voice was not angry. It was something quieter and far more dangerous than anger. "You knew exactly who Aldous was when you came into her life. And you deliberately. I don't owe you an explanation." Dorian moved a step around him. "The deal you were planning to finalize tonight," Gideon said. "The acquisition agreement with Vantage Entertainment. The one you needed Ren's signature on after the concert. Aldous' legal team filed an injunction on it this afternoon." Dorian stopped. "You can't acquire what you don't own," Gideon continued. "And you don't own anything connected to Ren Calloway's career. You never did. You were just waiting for a man you thought was too quiet to fight back." Dorian's jaw was tight as a closed fist. "He transferred a controlling stake of Croft Meridian this morning," Gideon said, "before he drove to the stadium, before he stood in the rain at that gate." He paused. "The new controlling partner is a music education nonprofit. Everything he built, he gave it away before she ever had the chance to take it." The silence between them was very loud. Then Dorian Fisk did what men like Dorian Fisk always do when the room turns. He walked away. No speech. No defense. Just the back of an expensive blazer disappearing down a corridor. And that was the last anyone in Ren Calloway's world saw of him. The production team had killed the screens by now. The venue's technical director was in a full emergency. Prescott was on 4 calls simultaneously and handling none of them well. But the crowd was not interested in what the production team was doing. They were interested in Ren. She was still standing at the center microphone. Someone in the front section started booing first. Isolated. Almost uncertain. Then a few more voices joined. Not a wall of sound. More like cracks spreading across ice. The celebrity guests in the VIP boxes were very still. A few had already stood and were making quiet exits. Her mother, Celestine, was in the 3rd row of the VIP section. She had been there all night. Dressed up, proud, basking in the reflected glow of her daughter's success. Now she was looking at the darkened screens and at her daughter's frozen face on stage, and something in her expression was collapsing, because Celestine understood immediately what those documents meant. She had told her daughter for years that Aldous was holding her back. She had been the loudest voice in the room whenever his worth was questioned. And now the stadium, 58,000 people and every streaming camera, had just shown the world exactly how wrong she had been. Ren finally moved. She walked off stage without a word. The microphone stand caught the edge of her gown as she passed it, and it tilted, then fell. Nobody picked it up. It lay on the stage floor, making a low hum through the monitors. She didn't go to the green room, didn't go to her dressing room. She went straight through the backstage corridor, through a side door and out into the rain. The same rain Aldous had been standing in 2 hours ago. She didn't have a coat, didn't have an umbrella. The silver gown absorbed the water immediately and became heavy, pulling at her with every step. She ran, not elegantly, not the way people run in films. She ran the way people run when something is chasing them that has their own face, stumbling in heels across a wet parking structure, calling his name into the noise of the rain. Aldous. No answer. Aldous, please. The heels weren't working. She stopped, pulled them off, and kept moving barefoot across the wet concrete. Gideon had told her, before she bolted, that the security team had last seen Aldous walking south on Prairie Avenue. She had no other direction. She just ran toward it. And here's the thing about Los Angeles in the rain at midnight. It's not romantic. It's not cinematic. It's cold and loud, and the streets smell like wet asphalt and something else underneath. Something older, harder. The kind of city that doesn't pause for personal crises. The buses still run. The lights still change. The world stays in motion regardless of what you're falling apart about. She found him at a bus stop on Prairie Avenue, just sitting there on the plastic bench, elbows on his knees, head slightly bowed, the same way she had seen him sit 100 times in the early years, at the kitchen table after a long shift, at the back of recording sessions when he was trying not to fall asleep, in hospital waiting rooms and courthouse hallways and small bar venues where the crowd was thin and the sound system was bad. Always patient. Always still, always there. She stopped 10 feet away. He looked up. His face was pale in a way she hadn't noticed on the stage, a paleness that had nothing to do with cold or rain. His eyes were tired in a way that went deeper than one bad night. She had seen that look somewhere before. Now she knew where. The medical report. She walked to the bench and sat beside him, not across from him, not standing over him, beside him. The way she used to sit on that old truck hood in the parking lot of the Dallas recording studio when they were 23 and 25 and poor and completely convinced that love was enough to carry everything. The rain came down around them. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was barely above the sound of the rain. Aldous was quiet for a moment. Then, 14 months. 14 months. The same amount of time he had known about Dorian. She thought about that, the weight of carrying both of those things simultaneously, without telling anyone, without asking for anything. Why didn't you tell me? The question cracked in her throat. About being sick. Why didn't you, Aldous? Why? He turned to look at her, and she saw it clearly now, the thing she had been moving too fast to see for years. He looked like a man who had already made his peace. Not defeated, not bitter, just resolved. The way people look when they have finished fighting something and chosen to carry it quietly instead. Because you'd already decided what I was, he said. Simply, no accusation in it. Just the plain shape of the truth. And I didn't want you to stay because you felt guilty. She pressed her hands over her mouth. I wanted my wife to love me before my money, he continued. I needed to know, at least once, that what we had was real, not obligation, not debt. He looked back at the rain. I waited too long to find out. The bus stop light above them flickered once. Aldous. Her voice broke completely. I am so... Don't. He said it gently, not a command, a request. Don't apologize for who you became. I watched you become her. I saw every step. And I was proud of you, genuinely proud, even when it hurt. She was crying now, not the performance of crying. The real kind. Ugly and uncontrolled. The kind that has been building for years behind a face that was always carefully composed. I sold everything tonight, he said quietly. The Croft Meridian stake. The venue partnerships. The label percentages. All of it. Transferred to the foundation this morning before I came here. The foundation? A music academy. For artists who can't afford studio time. Young kids. The ones who are where you were when I first heard you sing at Kappa's in Austin. He paused. I wanted something to outlast me that actually meant something. The bus appeared at the far end of the street. Its headlights cut through the rain. Ren grabbed his arm. Don't get on that bus. Ren. Please. The word came out smaller than she intended. Just don't go yet. He looked at her for a long moment. The bus arrived. Hissed to a stop. The doors opened. Aldous stood slowly, the careful way people stand when their body has started to cost them something. And he looked down at her. She looked up at him. Two people at the end of something and the beginning of something else, neither of which had a clean name. The letters, he said quietly. He reached into the inside pocket of his soaked jacket and produced one envelope, slightly crumpled, protected from the rain by the layer of fabric. He held it out to her. I kept one. I always kept one. She took it with both hands. Get out of the rain, Ren. He said it like he used to say it when she was stubborn about staying out too late on Austin nights when they were young and broke and invincible. Then he stepped onto the bus. The doors closed, and the bus pulled away into the Los Angeles rain, its taillights getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared at the intersection. She sat on that bench, barefoot, soaked through, silver gown ruined, and held the envelope with both hands and did not open it for a long time. When she finally did, there was a single folded piece of notebook paper inside. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her own, written 6 years ago in East Austin, the night after a label had rejected her for the 4th time. Aldous, I don't know if any of this is ever going to work, but I know that having you next to me makes me believe it might. You make me braver than I actually am. Don't ever stop doing that. Voo. She pressed it against her chest and sat in the rain until the last bus of the night went by. The internet did what the internet does. By the time Ren's car arrived to take her home, the clips were already everywhere. The humiliation, the screens, the documents, the moment she walked off stage. By morning, the hashtags were brutal. Her publicist called 12 times. She answered none of them. Prescott sent a 4-paragraph email about crisis management strategy. She read the first sentence and closed it. Her mother called. She answered that one. Mama. Her voice was flat, emptied out. Celestine started talking fast. Something about managing the narrative. Something about Dorian having misled them both. Something about how the media was being unfair. Mama. Ren said it again. Quietly. Celestine stopped. You told me he was holding me back. It wasn't an accusation. It was something sadder than that. You told me for years. The silence on the line was very long. I was wrong, Celestine said finally, in the small, terrible voice of a woman who has just fully understood the size of a mistake she cannot undo. I know, Ren said, and hung up. The Elevation tour collapsed quietly. Remaining tour dates were canceled due to financial restructuring. 3 of her major sponsors didn't renew. The streaming deal that Dorian had been brokering dissolved when his involvement became public. And when the nature of his strategy became clear, his investor group distanced itself from him entirely. Dorian Fisk relocated to Miami within 3 weeks. Prescott resigned and moved to manage a younger artist who didn't come with the weight of this particular news cycle. Isolde, the stylist, gave an interview. It was not kind. Ren moved out of the Bel Air house. She couldn't stay in a home she had only ever half understood was his, and took a smaller place in Silver Lake, the kind of neighborhood where nobody cared what your streaming numbers were, where the coffee shop didn't know your name. She stopped performing, not dramatically, not as a statement. She just stopped booking things, stopped returning the calls that came with offers attached, sat with the quiet for the first time in years, and found out it wasn't comfortable. She deserved that. 6 months after the concert, a small item appeared in a music industry newsletter. The Croft Meridian Arts Foundation had opened its first campus, a renovated warehouse space in Inglewood, for blocks from the apartment where Aldous had lived after he moved out of Bel Air. 12 recording suites, a proper mixing room, a performance hall that seated 200, free to use for qualifying young artists. The program director was a woman named Odette, Ren's old college friend, the one who had been a witness at their courthouse wedding. Odette had been the one to call Ren and tell her about the opening, not to invite her, just to let her know. He asked me to run it. Odette said, 6 months ago, before the concert, he already knew what was coming. Ren was quiet on the line. He's still here. Odette said, He's not well, Ren, but he's still here, and he's working. 2 months after the Academy opened, a music journalist named Philippa Strand published a long-form profile on Aldous Croft. It wasn't a revenge piece. Philippa had been writing about music for 20 years, and she had no interest in turning a dying man's story into a takedown of his wife. It was a profile about legacy, about what it means to build something that outlives a moment. The piece ran with a photograph of Aldous sitting in one of the Academy's recording booths, headphones around his neck, listening to a teenage girl play her original song through the studio monitors. He was smiling at whatever he was hearing. He looked thin. He looked tired. He looked exactly like who he had always been. The profile included a short quote from an interview Philippa had conducted the week prior. The question: after everything that happened, the concert, the public exposure, the way the story ended with your wife, why are you still doing this? Why open academy? Why keep helping people? His answer, printed in full: pain has two places it can go. It can go inward and become poison, or it can go outward and become something useful. I had a long time to decide which direction mine was going. I decided I didn't want to spend whatever time I have left being bitter about someone I loved. I'd rather spend it making sure some kid in Inglewood gets a recording session they couldn't afford. That's it. That's the whole thing. Ren read the profile on her phone in her Silver Lake apartment, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, like she used to sit in the East Austin apartment when they were 23. She read it twice, then she put the phone face down on the floor and sat with the silence of it. And for the first time in a very long time, she was not performing anything. Not for cameras, not for crowds, not even for herself. Just a woman sitting with the full weight of who she had been, and the very slow, very quiet question of who she still had the chance to become. 3 weeks after the Philippa Strand profile published, a car pulled up outside the Croft Meridian Arts Foundation on a Tuesday morning. Odette was the one who saw it from the window. She watched Ren Calloway get out of the car alone. No stylist, no publicist, no entourage, wearing jeans and a plain jacket and carrying nothing. She stood outside the entrance for a long moment before she came in. Odette met her in the lobby. They didn't say much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said in its own way. Is he here? Ren asked. Studio 3, Odette said. Ren walked down the hallway, past the framed photographs on the walls, past the sound of a young man practicing guitar through a closed door, past a bulletin board covered in session sign-up sheets and thank you notes from students. She stopped outside Studio 3. Through the glass panel in the door, she could see Aldous. He was sitting across the console from a young girl, maybe 16, who was playing back a recording she had just made. The girl was nervous, watching his face for a reaction, and Aldous was listening with his full attention. That same complete, undivided attention he had given to everything that ever mattered to him. And then he smiled and said something, and the girl's entire face changed. The way Ren's face had changed once, when a man in the third row of a small Austin bar believed in her before she believed in herself. She stood at the glass for a while. She didn't knock. She wasn't ready for that yet. And she had learned, late, but she had learned that something should not be rushed to the comfort of the person who caused the damage. But she came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that, and slowly, the way rivers work, the way real things are built, something began, not a repair. You don't repair some things. Something new, quieter than before, built on ground that had been cleared by the hardest kind of honesty. And Aldous, who had always been patient, let it grow at its own pace, because that was who he was. That had always been who he was. If this story moved you, if Aldous reminded you of someone in your life who carries quietly and asks for nothing, share this video with them. They deserve to know you see them. Drop a comment below. What was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story coming to this channel is already written, and it will hit just as hard. See you there.